This is Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. On the show, you'll hear from innovators in the food space. We'll have disruptive conversations with people from around the globe who are taking the lead on topics like food sustainability, ending world hunger, food security, and so much more. I'm your host, Paul Newnham. In this episode, we're talking to Dalia David and Newton Campbell Jr. from Heritage Space Food, a groundbreaking gastrodiplomacy nonprofit that's redefining how we think about culture, food, and space exploration. In today's chat, we're exploring how heritage and culture can be preserved through food systems designed for extreme environments, including space missions. You'll hear about the intersection of culinary artistry and space science, how chefs and scientists collaborate to innovate without erasing culture, and why food might be the most powerful tool for connecting humanity across the cosmos. Let's get into it. Dalia and Newton, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us.
It's great to have you guys here. We're in New York and it's during Climate Week. It's a busy time. There's a lot going on. You guys both come from very different backgrounds and you've come together for an amazing, really interesting reason, Heritage Space Food. And so I'm going to hear from both of you. Let's start with you, Dalia. Can you share a little bit about some of your career path and your journey as a chef and that starting point for you?
Yeah. I started out like a lot of us in a very traditional corporate path. And at the time, it didn't feel like meaningful work. And I think that's what I've actively just chosen in life is just what makes sense where I can actually make the most impact with the skills and with the heart that I have. And I ended up in culinary school and I was here in New York and I started working in restaurants and I specifically chose Jean-Georges. He had a restaurant in meatpacking called Spice Market and he did Vietnamese, Thai, and Indian food in that restaurant. And you would think that was a really bad idea, but he did it so well. And I think that was one of the reasons why I want to learn from somebody who took three different, inherently different cultures and sort of put them in the same roof and figured out how to create a diverse menu. And there was this connectivity with how the dishes all sort of spoke to each other. And there's an intuition in how the cultures sort of know each other when it comes to those flavors. And I want to learn the nuances of that. So I sort of worked under the sous chef and the head chef over there. And then I was this is not in any specific order, but a couple things I did was I worked at LinkedIn and I was the head vegetable chef. And this is well before they had a food program. This is when they initially started thinking about it. So I was working out of a ghost kitchen in a very sketchy part of Long Island City before it was considered safe. And I was working overnights and I was making breakfast and lunch for 300 people and deciding what that menu looked like and what it meant for their brain, for their functionality at work. And so this is when it was just breakfast and lunch, no dinner at LinkedIn. And this is well before this idea was truly thought of, because now we've got places like Google and LinkedIn and Meta that like they just have this offering where they want you to stay there and eat the food. And there's obviously like a chef, there's programming. So I feel touched to be part of the initial phase of what that looked like and, putting that together. And I also have a deep interest in plants and just knowing vegetables on its own. So I worked at a raw vegan restaurant called Pure Food and Wine. This is during the time of that Netflix special, Bad Vegan, and just all the craziness of that. So I learned a lot about leadership and what it was like to man a ship when everything was going down early on in my chef career. And I decided to work in the private world. And during COVID, something I did was work with corporate companies around getting their employees together and have deeper, more meaningful conversations than just say work conversations. And it went back to sort of connectivity and knowing each other in a more beautiful and different and much deeper way. I keep saying the word deeper, but really I think elementally, my work is always about how deep can we go when it comes to two people connecting. And that sort of is, I think, like the preliminary phases of what gastrodiplomacy looks like in heritage-based food now, because ultimately, years later, Newton and I were discussing about, I will say very frankly, I was really depressed about the racial conflicts and stuff post George Floyd, and I just didn't think anything was really fixable. And I was very sad about it. I just thought it was too big. And I was telling Newton this, and Newton said, "No, you can do it. We can do this. We can figure this out." And deeper conversations and the fact that he works on the space sector side and I'm in the food side, we thought gastrodiplomacy would be a good way to bring countries together in a larger mission when it comes to connecting and understanding each other better.
Yeah. Well, we'll come more to the drill down into that gastrodiplomacy, because I think it is a really interesting, and it's interesting at the time we're in this place we're in at the moment, how that role, food can play a role in that diplomacy. Newton, bringing you in, can you share some of your journey as a scientist?
Yeah, as my journey as a scientist, I mean, I feel like there's, from childhood, science was always kind of pushed towards me a little bit, to be honest with you. My mom used to always get me chemistry kits and things like that. And so there was always a little bit of that, and libraries played a very big role in my life. So, between that and some of just the other institutions that were around, science museums, things like that, there was always just a little tinge of science around me. And, it was really as I was shaping what I wanted to do for a career and things like that, that I started diving into science full bore. I'm a computer scientist, which isn't, some would argue it's glorified applied mathematics. But today I've made my way all the way to being, more of a computational physicist, consulting at this point with NASA as a computational physicist and AI researcher, and other groups with the UN where I use that knowledge to make impact. But that got started with me working actually in the national security space, right? So right after college, I get a computer science master's. I'm working in the national security space. I am, for lack of a better term, I'm a hacker, right, at that point, right? So my master's was focused on cybersecurity, all of those things, and I start working with this agency under a consulting firm called DARPA. A lot of folks aren't familiar with DARPA. They're familiar with NASA, my current client, but DARPA is what I like to think of as NASA's angrier older cousin, right? So 1957, quick side story, 1957, Sputnik launches. The US freaks out. A year later, it creates NASA. Hey, we got to compete in civil space. Let's innovate. Also, space exploration is good for everybody, so let's do it. Prior to that, about 9 months prior to that, the president at the time gave the Secretary of Defense, and the Congress obviously gave the Secretary of Defense a ton of money and said, "Listen, we didn't know the Soviets could do that. Let's make sure that we know what's possible from now on by inventing technological surprise." That's where the ARPAs came from. That's where the Advanced Research Projects Agency came from, where you start to look at what's happening in the world. You say, hey, here are some avenues for businesses to invest some money, or areas that businesses potentially wouldn't invest money, but if they have some money, we can actually occupy a new space in the market, come up with revolutionary technical changes, and change the world, not to channel my inner Bill Nye. And so, I started working with that organization and doing a lot of projects, doing my PhD at the same time in computer science, and starting to shift over into physics, just given the kinds of work that I was doing, power grid work, how to defend the power grid, lots of work with networking, even some quantum networking, things like that. And so started just kind of building up my physics chops. And really, while I was doing a lot of that work, both from the sustainability side as well as the global aid side that the military occupies, because the military is this big, beefy mechanism within the United States, I was able to and had the room to really pitch ideas, and had the support from some very special people within that ecosystem, really supporting me, really backing me, so that when I saw ways that they changed the world and I had ideas about changing the world, they actually supported me in saying, hey, we can actually promote these ideas and actually work on those things. And it's really what gave me this lesson, this motivation, and to much of an extent, this confidence that, a person with some great ideas and the right motivation can really make changes. You give that person a team, you're going to change the world, right? A team of like-minded folks. And so, at a certain point, after about 8-9 years working in that defense space, because I had been interacting with the space community in DC in the local area, there were lots of local events put on by the Planetary Society, a great local advocacy group or national advocacy group focused on promoting space and getting the public to know and enjoy the way we do space exploration, to better get to know ourselves. I decided to shift my work to NASA, and that's where I got to embrace even more scientific work, more work in the computational physics space, from heliophysics to autonomous flight and autonomous systems. And it's been absolutely fantastic since then. Also, through the Planetary Society, I got to know a little bit of Australia. There were some folks who had previously worked in Australia. They introduced me to some Australian leadership groups, and before you know it, just through networking, through talking about ideas of where their space agency should go, people from this country on the other side of the world asked me to actually come down and be the space director of the new national consortium that they had put together. It was an absolutely incredible experience. I loved every bit of it. Australia had, it had its real strengths. Also had its problems in governance when it comes to science and science development that they worked through as well. But I absolutely enjoyed and loved my experience doing that. But yeah, now I'm back here in the U.S. Back to
working with NASA as your client.
Yeah, NASA's my main client. I'm working both with one of the autonomous systems groups at NASA, as well as the heliophysics groups, just working on science investigation using AI, working on how to get flight machines to think for themselves, things like that, and just trying to build a smarter tomorrow. So.
Amazing. Well, before we kind of dig right into heritage space food, you hinted a little bit, Dalia, about how you guys met. But how did you guys come together? Because this is
yeah,
this network requires.
There's got to be a story.
Very
there.
interesting.
There's got to be a really interesting story.
Newton, do you want to take? I'll add to the end, but you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Again, I hate to throw so much background in here, but the context is needed. So Dalia and I were both at different times selected for a network run by a philanthropy foundation that sends impact leaders to both Israel and part of Palestine to learn leadership lessons to the backdrop of a complex area. Your group did go to the West Bank too. Yeah,
we went to Ramallah, Palestine, along with our Israel trip.
Yeah, in the West Bank. Yeah, and you learn a lot of the history. You learn about the conflicts, things like that. You're in different verticals. So Dalia went on the trip called Taste,
Reality Taste,
and I went on the trip called Tech. And yeah, the idea is to with people that are within your space that are fairly giving, and people who want to make impact, et cetera, to learn these leadership lessons to the backdrop of a complex area. When you're done, you become a part of the network that has been selected to do these kinds of things. And they'll often send folks to other countries where they're doing partnered development work, building schools, building elderly homes, women's co-ops, et cetera, so that these leaders can, one, find ways to participate, and two, identify what works, because we all get a lot of examples of things not working. So it's good to find things that work. And so through one of these trips, I actually was a facilitator on one of the trips to Morocco, in which I met Dalia. And Dalia, you want to take it from there?
Yeah, just wanted to say we ate really well in both trips and drank really well. There's ample amounts of food. It was very much a understanding the culture and the way of the people through the food.
Yeah.
They bring a really dynamic and interesting group of people together to talk about different types of problems, and it really opens your mind and you leave sort of expanded, right? So like they may have a certain mission in mind for us, but we sort of decide what all of that looks like. So post this trip, Newton and I, stayed connected. He moved to Australia, started working at a Rose. I was in New York City. My work when I was working privately was initially initially it was just the standard old private chef, but it sort of evolved into becoming the tastemaker of the private homes that I worked in and sort of building a food and lifestyle culture. And so that's sort of the mindset in which I approached community gatherings and how people worked together and connected and spoke and sort of saw the world together. And Newton's work as the facilitator for our cohort, he was sort of bringing us together in a very similar way. The food was provided, though. But
I didn't cook it. Sorry.
we did do a cooking lesson.
We did do a cooking lesson together. That's true.
It wasn't a competition, but I did make it
with one of the women's co-ops. Yep.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. It was great. And I just remember thinking when, after what was it, like 9 days together, like Newton and I really just, we have this ability to do something big together, capacity from two different frameworks, but with this really big heart to do good things for the world. And there was just that idea that there is a greatness to two people like us working together. And it just sort of evolved from there. It took obviously several months of many different discussions. And it wasn't like it came together from we're going to build an organization or a company. It's just a natural conversation that led to a gastrodiplomacy project, which made sense for both of us. We both have a deep appreciation of global cultures, people connecting together, and people working together really well. So it naturally made sense that this is how we would end up working together.
And like she said, we were thinking about the future. I still remember when we were having that call, because I was having some of the same thoughts, the post-George Floyd and performative DEI and all of those things. And we started having these conversations about, what does the future really look like? How can we help to build a future where this is not as performative, whether intentional or unintentional, where it's not as performative, where we are actually creating pathways to equal justice for people, where we're enabling it. And I think that's one of the key things, enabling people to really control their own destiny.
So if we wanted to define heritage space food, what would you say it is?
Heritage space food, very literal.
Yeah.
But I think you understand with your work. There's just a realness to communities showing up, saying, "This is what we need. This is who we are. This is how we express ourselves." And that type of soft power is very big when it comes to the impact on being able to move the needle and make things happen. And people often don't utilize that when they create their marketing campaigns and their schemes or how they want to push a specific agenda. And I think it's not really about an agenda anymore. It's about real conversations about how we can get to the bottom of what is actually necessary and needed among each community to make them feel like they're part of something larger and feel empowered to do more that shows who they are as a community to the larger world. And so then inevitably they just start to connect. They connect with each other that way.
And space is a great enabler for that. So the way that this came about was we were discussing the longer term journeys in space, right? You have right now we're all talking about Artemis, which for the folks who don't know, it's our current plans to build a sustained environment around the moon. NASA has coordinated over 53 countries to figure out how do we work together, how do we interoperate on the moon to have an off-Earth sustained environment there. We've already succeeded in doing that with the International Space Station. Let's do this with the moon as a staging ground to go even further, right? Because once we get beyond the moon, which is about 3 days away, now you're talking about something that's months away. At the time, I believe I told you, propulsion, all of that, it would take about 9 months to get to Mars. Now we're talking about reducing it down to 6 months. Still, very long time. 12 isolated people in a tin can with a fire under their butt, heading to another planet. Those people are going to be some of the loneliest people that have ever existed, right? You're going to get to a point where you are in the middle of the pathway, the trajectory between Earth and Mars, and you won't be able to see either with the naked eye. You're in the void, right? What do you have to remember the planet? What do you have to remember Earth? And we talked about, 100, 200 years from now, people on the way to another star. How do you actually have those people remember aspects of Earth? How do you capture our stories through more than just a textbook and education curriculum? It's through our traditions, through our culture. And one of the things that we want as we're looking at the future is for people to be involved in that tradition, in that culture, in that storytelling, so that whether you are the Yoruba people in far north Queensland, or you are some of the people of Appalachia, or you are the community in New Orleans, your stories are being remembered in the far-flung future. That's where Heritage Space Food came from. Our desire to create a media organization. Heritage Space Food is a media nonprofit that focuses on telling stories, participating in storytelling about cultures around Earth, so that we can take that into the space sector. We do it through the lens of space. What do you want to be about your culture to be remembered into the future? How do you want your traditions? What are the priority traditions? Have that discussion among yourselves. What are the things that you would like in terms of the way that you eat food, the way that you serve food, the way that you dine together, to be remembered into the far-flung future? It's about that cultural preservation aspect going forward, and we have conversations around it. We have lots of media that we're lining up in terms of things like podcasts, in terms of potential other forms of media, documentaries, things like that we're preparing to do. So
I love what you said about the enabler, and because often when I first thought about and heard about this project, I was a little like, that's kind of interesting. Like, you're talking about space, and there's so many challenges, I guess, here.
Yes,
but as you started to talk about this, it was a conversation of saying, oh, okay, you're using this as a vehicle to talk about the importance of heritage in food.
Yes.
And using that time frame or that medium to enable people to think differently. And I think sometimes when things are right in front of us, and they're about, like, what are you doing right now, it's harder to change. And so that heritage element, talk to me a little bit about, why is heritage so important? You mentioned loneliness. You talked a little bit about some of the injustice issues. How does heritage and our food, we kind of know this, but, we all are experts in our own food system. So we are all, and what we enjoy, but how does that play, and why is that tradition so important to really preserve?
I think culture is non-negotiable. So say we're talking about like refugee camps and people that have been moved away from where they normally live, right? So the way to keep them feeling connected to home is through opportunities for them to reach what they know and are familiar with, which is ultimately could be their food, could be their rituals, could be the language, right? And for us, we place a deep importance on when it comes to the recipes that they grew up on, because food is something that everybody can agree on, brings us back to who we are, where we come from, how we were built as human beings. But I also want to say, I agree with you, Paul, and like, there's so many problems here on Earth. Like, why would we just care about heritage? And I think that's the one thing that is often forgotten with space research, is that there's so much information that hasn't actually been transferred over to the Earth resiliency solutions that it actually offers. Because if you think about it, these astronauts living far away in this extreme environment, there's so many ways that they've figured out how to do that, that it actually once passed over. And this is, I think, one of the key issues that we're noticing, is that the information has not, and I like to say the ivory tower of science, but it hasn't fully passed on to different industries. And so one of the things that we want to do outside of just sharing these stories about heritage and culture is making sure there's this soft infrastructure for cross-collaboration with different industries. So, for example, we've got the chefs with the ethnobotanists, with the space scientists and the researchers and the media agencies, but we're all kind of coming together so that everything sort of passes around. And I think something I missed in saying is, like, we have researchers that are focused on famine. So we get all these people in a room together to have these conversations, to sort of share what we know and sort of connect the dots. I think there's just ample opportunities here for things to pass. And we want to be the proper vehicle to do that.
And on that note, space has a long history of passing information back, but in terms of traceability, we're not very strong at that. NASA publishes a book, for instance, of spin-offs every year in the book, it's hundreds of spin-offs. Realistically, there's untold spin-offs, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions innovations that have come from the space ecosystem, particularly because of the way that we particularly set it up in the U.S., where space is in every state. There is some lab, there is some, there are plenty of universities, there are sites within your state that are somehow affiliated with NASA at the very least, and now other aspects of Department of Defense and things like that. But when it comes to transferring things back to the community, it's just usually done in such an ad hoc way. But we did see a pathway here for it to happen in the food space, where it's done in almost a direct way, right? Where it's not indirect, where we are actually convening these groups together. Because when you, and I think the point that we're kind of skipping over here, when you do these things in space, particularly, I see you're wearing your sustainability badge over there, right? In particular, you have to make those things inherently sustainable. And so, especially if you're talking about food and bringing certain cultures into the space discussion, well, now you're bringing those cultures into the space discussion to discuss, well, how are we going to create forms of packaging that are sustainable, that are reusable, et cetera? How are we going to deal with the food waste in making your dishes, or in harvesting what you need, or in serving the food itself? How are we going to come up with sustainable methods of disposing of any remnants of the food, cleaning things, et cetera, that align with your culture? And to have those, and to have folks directly in conversation, it makes that transfer to back to Earth a lot easier than it has been before. We're just trying to enable that transfer.
Right.
There's a lot of science in this, and this is like, from a food perspective, obviously food is essentially bringing together ingredients, so there is a lot of similarities. I mean, my experience of space food is dehydrated ice cream.
Oh yeah, that's everybody. So
and that's everyone.
Astronauts don't love that, by the way.
I'm
Just
sure,
to be clear, they do not.
I'm sure people don't.
Yes.
But there's obviously all of those things you talked about, and you didn't have to be considered. Efficiencies, and especially if you're talking 6 months there, 6 months back, obviously you would want to spend a bit of time there while if you're going to go all that way, So you're talking about also storage, you're talking about how you do this. So
health issues and microgravity.
How do you work out all these things? Yeah, gas, and too much gas or not. Like, I'm a big fan of beans, but beans might have issues.
Well, and to give you a sense of where we are now, right? You have people on the International Space Station, they're eating pizzas, they're eating burritos, and that's all well and good. But, and you can figure out how to package and freeze dry and all of those things, and we've gotten that down. We've been living in space for over 30 years now, and we've been able to do that. However, when you bring someone from Ethiopia into the conversation, well, how are you going to cut wheat for injera, and how are you going to actually eat that in
Grind
space?
it,
Well,
make
now
powder,
you have to think about innovations, sustainable ones that were never thought of before, that could end up impacting the societies, those Ethiopian societies here on Earth, right? And so how do you perform that exercise? How do you get people interested in this kind of, in this sort of imaginative view of the future of their own society, seeing their own society in the future? That alone is huge, right? That's been big here. I mean, you remember lots of folks have talked about the first time that they saw Lieutenant Uhura on Star Trek, right? And what that meant to see somebody looking like them in the future. Imagining their culture in the future alone is huge, let alone the actual sustainable benefits.
Just so you know, you can grow beans as like a food product, in space food production. So ISRO has started growing mung beans because Indians eat so much of that.
That's the Indian Space Organization.
Right, Indian Space Organization. And just so you know, the Chinese Space Agency has figured out how to grow rice. So it's happening. Yeah, we can grow tomatoes.
Okay.
Yeah, NASA figured that out.
Australia's got quite a robust Plants for Space program, led by both University of Western Australia, and I believe it's Adelaide University. Okay. Don't kill me if it's ANU.
But this initial ability to grow, do space food crop production in space was the initial reason why we have hydroponics. Like this was an invention from space research, right? So
there were a lot of spin-offs.
There's a lot. This goes back to the ad hoc, because everybody else asks, why do we care about going to Mars? Why do we care? It's not about the actual going to Mars, in my opinion. For some, they would say that's it. It's the process of creating and these new inventions and all these discoveries that support what's possible when it comes to being able to transfer to Earth. Because if we got hydroponics from space food production, then what else can we do? I mean, there's so much.
And so, talk to me a bit about, so like nutrition. You were talking a little bit about like, how do you think about also the nutritional side, the health side of keeping people healthy in that kind of environment? And then how does that apply?
So again, just to give my quick example from University of Western Australia, there's a great doctor there named James Lloyd who has been working on, well, how do I genetically modify plants so that I can inject the types of nutrition that I may need into lettuces, into tomatoes. I believe they've tried broccoli over there as well. And so it starts to allow us, again, just through the investigation of these kinds of problems, to think about ways that we can do that there so that we can, again, make these things easier to do here on Earth. But
right, yeah. We just did an exercise 2 weeks back, I believe, at this point, with at Nexplore, which is in Arlington, Virginia, with Noma's Test Kitchen and Jose Andres' research group, the two chef groups, and Heritage Space Food. We were on stage talking to a room full of scientists, and we were sharing, if we are planning on sending a chef astronaut, which is a plan in the future, somebody that plays the role not just as astronaut, but just truly just does the job of a chef up in space, what would be the requirements that they would need when it comes to, we call kitchen equipment hardware, when it comes to the hardware they need to cook the food, but also what kinds of dishes could they make the fellow astronauts that can support with the health issues that you mentioned. So when it comes to the pressure in the body, it goes upward, so their nose is very stuffy and they can't really smell or taste as well. And so what can you do when it comes to that? So each of us proposed different dishes and offered kitchen tools we would need in order to each of the chefs. Yeah. Well, Newton was up on stage and being our scientist in residence, and that was really good guardrails. Actually, it really helped all the chefs feel very comfortable talking to a room full of scientists that Newton was on stage with us. But, something I came up with was a grain bowl, and I had chosen couscous for its Q texture, the bounciness of it. But obviously, to create couscous, you have to turn the wheat, the semolina, into these round pearls. And I was thinking the Israeli couscous, just because it's more fun, in my opinion, to chew on. But if you wanted, you could go just very high protein, because they can now grow amaranth up in the space station. So I thought that would be lovely as a grain. And then we were adding things like mustard greens because it clears the nostrils, but then there's the spice element to give it more flavor. And I was thinking about doing yuzu koshu from Japan and gochujang from Korea. And we had the Israeli couscous that I mentioned earlier. And we were doing the olive oil that could be from Italy or Spain. And we did an algae oil that also could be from the USA, because that's a USA invention, but also can be an Israeli invention as well. And there's all these different ingredients, like onion powder, and we can add all these things into it and make like just a bowl and peas are from where? Ireland, England. You can have all these different things in one bowl that is highly functional, provides the protein, the carbs, all the things that the vitamin E, all the vitamins E, A, K, E, all the things, and think about the flavor profile and also look at it from all these different countries. These pantry ingredients, right? They come from different countries. And I mentioned a couple different seaweeds, dull seaweed, because it's easy to throw in there, some miso for some more umami. You just have this like beautiful soupy bowl that is lovely and fulfills all the health requirements when it comes to it's lovely. It's something I eat often for lunch, but it's just a way to get different parts of cultures from all over the world into one bowl and get nourished and clear your nostrils, because that's a big problem, the stuffy nose, and the spice for the flavor, and 2 different kinds of spice, gochujang and yuzu koshu because it's bright and up there, and gochujang because it's got depth and it sort of brings you down, so you just like really feel flavor. I mean, and then it's just important. These things make you feel alive, right? Like, why do we like spice? Why do we like sour? It wakes you up. You need these things. And up in space, those are key issues. Sour is really hard to feel up there. And so it's something that they're trying to figure out how to implement. Spice, they reach for so they can feel something. And also sweet is harder when your nose is stuffed and your taste perceptions have changed in microgravity. So, as a chef astronaut, how can we do that? How can we support them? What kinds of equipment do we need to create these dishes? And
going back to memories, everything you just said right now, you basically put an atlas in a bowl.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So again, if we're talking about cultural preservation, right, being able to see something like that, being able to tell that story in a specific way, it's a great way of remembering and preserving the reasons why these things exist.
And I've always cooked like that, like fundamentally, as many cultures as I can get into a bowl. And I never called it fusion. It's nice to be able able to cook a dish from a country, I agree with that. But at the same time, to be able to look at a dish and say, I got this from here, this country, and then be able to honor it and feel good about it, I think that's really lovely. I think it's a really great way to exist.
And the food ways are fascinating, right? I mean, that's something that's a term I learned since working with Dalia, is this whole notion of food ways, where these things come from, right? That is such a fascinating notion to me. You know, when you think about what you're talking about with some of the Israelis, couscous and things like that, or when you even look at, my parents are Jamaican and or Caribbean, and, you know, you look at things like, you know, curries that we eat and where they come from.
My
you know,
ancestors,
from
India,
right?
straight to Jamaica,
You know,
where his ancestors became a part of that story.
It's so much more enriching when you start to realize these different aspects and just kind of nerd out about the history of where all this
I don't
stuff
think it's
comes from.
sacrilegious. I think it's exactly how the world works. We put everything into a bowl because we exist like that.
Yeah. And again, heritage space food is all about, you know, thinking about the extension of those food ways. We've carried them from this culture to this culture to this culture. Let's take them off Earth.
And if we're going to space, what does that look like? And also, why do we care about space? Let's talk about that, you know?
Yeah. I think the word that I was thinking as you were talking is this remembering. And I think remembering is such an interesting concept because it goes back to, I think, some of the early reflections that you had around the challenges that sometimes we've forgotten.
Yeah.
These cultures, we've forgotten these heritage, you know, the heritage that we all come from, and that creates the diversity, the joy in life.
And for space, I don't want us to forget why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
I want us to remember us,
Yes.
the humanity that's actually being expanded out into the cosmos, not planting a flag for the sake of planting a flag, but remembering our people, remembering where we come from.
And I think the flavor, the emotion, the experience, that connecting that comes from storytelling, but also through creating something in a bowl, but then that it also has those benefits. You know, that innovation, finding that sweet spot is pretty spectacular. It creates a unique environment for helping us to address some of the big challenges that we face and unlocks that. So Dalia, you are auditioning and training for being that first astronaut
I would love
chef.
to go through that training myself because I'm quite curious what it takes to be a chef astronaut. And I think it would actually be very beneficial for our work at Heritage Space Food. There is a lot of talk around trainings being developed. It has not happened yet. But once it does start, and we've talked to several people that want to do that, different organizations. So once it starts to happen, it'll be great to get. And I think this is what I get really excited about, is that this is another avenue for chefs to do their work in an interesting and meaningful way after they have either aged out or sort of lost their desire to do chef work in the traditional ways. That there's this completely new avenue of work opportunities to support in the building of space food development, because right now it's a lot of food engineers and some chefs. We're slowly getting, you know, the Jose Andres chefs, Charisse Gray is really on top of it right now, and she's sort of figuring out how to do that. And she was on stage with us, and, you know, she was talking about how to create a, what was it, a Spanish tortilla? She did, that was her dish that she was thinking about doing up there. So it's great, but it's just the beginning, and there's no specific training. It's all trial and error. So we're really looking forward to, as Heritage Space Food, being able to, once again, like offer new opportunities to communities and industries and just shape things very differently. There's so much.
Yeah. And there's great people. Again, I mean, you just mentioned Charisse Gray. I mean, shout out to her. You know, there's great people that we would love to tap for new ideas about the future of humanity, right? And this brings them into the fold. I mean, and those people are all over the planet. We've had some great conversations as lead ups to some of the media work that we're doing with people all
really
over the
interesting
planet.
people, and not just chefs.
Not just chefs, like,
food
you know,
ethnographers, like just really cool
and
people,
just cultural leaders. You know, I've talked to quite a number of folks that are Aboriginal Australians and just you know, other Australian folks from in the culinary space in all sorts of parts of East Asia. I mean, it's fantastic to talk about this and get their ideas about concepts that they hadn't necessarily considered before, and in a context that they'd never considered before. Because, like we talked about, that's where innovation does really come from. It gets you thinking about, well, why can't we do that?
Yeah.
What I love about this, and it's that looking back. So you're looking right back into some of the, you know, in our country, one of the most ancient civilizations on the planet, but looking back at those stories, looking back at those foods, those traditions, but also using that to look forward.
Yeah.
And I think it's sometimes a choice that we see between the future and innovation or the past. And it's actually got to be both. It's got to be both. And without both, it's not possible.
It's very much the both, because one of the things I offered 2 weeks ago to that large group of scientists was, why not brew cedar, which is a medicinal usage for a lot of First Nations, especially in the USA. There's several. I mean, Iroquois, there's several nations, and I don't want to not say their names correctly, so I'll say the one that I can pronounce really well, which is Iroquois and the Cree Nation. They both use cedar in many ways to build their boats, to build their houses, to sip for their ritual purposes. But I mentioned cedar tea because I thought it smells, if I ever brewed it smells like trees. And one of the things that astronauts miss is trees. So why not brew it on a ritualistic in a ritualistic way when they wake up or they're about to wind down to go to sleep in their little pods? It's just a way to say we have Earth here in our little space.
As we close, one of the things I love to ask is just tell me a favorite food memory.
Yeah.
Who wants to go first?
I mean, of course, I'm like ready to go. So I grew up in India. I don't know if you knew that, but I've lived there, South India and Kerala. Okay. And I grew up on a pineapple plantation, and we just by nature, food is medicine. That's just something I understood, grew up with. Whenever I got sick, we would have like tulsi tea. We would take the holy basil, we brew it fresh. Tastes way better than dried if you can ever grow it yourself. It's really beautiful. To this day, and especially, it's just like kind of like a reconnection to culture. I've always like really enjoyed sipping on that tea or having that supplement, but now I take it every morning as just this work is really important and it's really powerful. And this is how I began. And so this is what grew out in my front yard and my backyard and the side yard. And so I have it actually in my bag right now. And I dropped it running over here and I grabbed it from the street and I was like, I don't care if it's dirty. This is really precious to me. I'm keeping it. And it's just it's a little container of tulsi supplements, Amazing. And it's really very special to me because every time I taste that flavor, I remember what it's like to be young and being part of the culture that I was initially brought into. And I think that's really important because now I have a combination of the American and Indian culture in me, as well as I think I always say Newton and I are very global. It's just we are not the cultures that we initially come from. We are everywhere internally. And so, but I love to give a nod to where I come from, and that's how I do it.
Amazing.
Yeah. And honestly, on that note, now that I think about it, I'm going to go with mom's curry goat. Jamaicans eat a lot of curry. I specifically have memories of my mom messing with me when she would buy a portion of a goat from a butcher that we used to go to, and would still have its head on it. Yeah.
There was a butcher downtown. Okay, in Ohio.
And the goat would still actually have a portion of its head, and she would scare me with the eyeball as a little child, just to mess with me because I was bothering her in the kitchen. But yeah, just family meals with that beautiful little smoky green curry powder curry goat in our lovely Jamaican family was fantastic. So
well, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you. This is fantastic. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate being on.
Good to chat.
Yeah. And when you get a chance, check us out on heritagespacefood.com. We have our
we'll put all the links down the bottom.
Yes. Appreciate it.
You can join us and you can follow us on LinkedIn. That's where you get most of our updates.
Yes. Okay. Right now. Yep.
Perfect. You've been listening to Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. Future Fork is produced by Disruptive Consulting Solutions and supports the SDG2 Advocacy Hub. For more info, head to the website futureforkpodcast.com. This show was produced with strategy and production support from Wavelength Creative. So you don't miss an episode of Future Fork, make sure to subscribe to or follow the show in your podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a 5-star review. It really helps others find the show. I'm Paul Newnham, and I'll see you in the next episode.